Hey, what's up guys? This is Sunny from Bottom Split Podium, and we are on the balcony of my Tokyo apartment. For now, me and my wife are actually in the process of moving, which is part of the reason why I'm doing this on my balcony. Yeah, this is a short sort of first impressions and technical teardown of the Sim Racing Bay BB Ultra, which is a button box for the Simucube 2 by Tomo from Sim Racing Bay. That is sort of the spiritual successor of a limited release BB Pro 32 that he released earlier this year. Now, there's a few key differences between the two models. I haven't actually looked at either of them yet, actually. I only bought the BB Ultra. I never actually have touched the BB Pro 32. I've only seen what people said about it online. But a few of the key differences is that the Pro 32, as the 32 in the name designates, actually includes a 32 centimeter Motomech Super Quadro clone steering wheel. The other key difference is that the Ultra has two 7-way funky switches, which have a directional hat switches included, along with the rotary encoder and the push button. And the BB Pro 32 only had rotary encoders and buttons. So that's the key difference. The other difference is that I purchased my BB Ultra a couple of days ago, which means that it actually does not include the anodized red finish aluminum knobs. It's actually black anodized for the funky switch knob and the encoder knob. So those are the main differences between the two. So I've only taken this out of the shipping box. I didn't actually open it up. So you're going to be looking at it with me. We're going to look at it together. The main reason why I'm doing this, even though there's a couple of videos online of people reviewing this button box, the first reason is that the other videos were good, don't get me wrong, but they didn't actually talk about the physical properties of the box. Nobody tore it open to take a look at the actual wiring. Nobody actually inspected the internal components, like the buttons themselves, like to see what kind of momentary switches are included. So I'm going to try to do my best to sort of give my limited engineering experience, like apply my limited engineering experience to this button box itself, to see if I can provide some insight into the build quality itself, and sort of like how does it rank up for the price that you pay. Is this a pretty good button box in my opinion, and is it not a good button box, or how do I feel about it personally? The other thing is I'm not going to actually attach this to a steering wheel and try it out. The main reason being that this button box doesn't have an LCD display or any LED lighting or anything that would sort of differentiate the experience other than the physical touch of the button box itself. So the way that the buttons feel and the encoder feels itself, that's going to be the main thing that I want to inspect or review. The other aspects of using a button box with the Simucube is more dependent on the Simucube software itself. So like that sort of experience, you could look at somebody else's video to get an idea of it. So with that being said, let's dive in. Let's open this thing up and let's take a look at it. Now I have a couple of tools here, which I'm not sure if I'll need. I have my box cutter in case that there's any tape that I need to remove. And I have my Allen keys. I don't know if it includes Allen keys to attach it to a wheel or not, but I intend on opening it up, so we'll see if this comes in handy. Oh, decals. There's no manual, it looks like. No warranty information. All that information's online, so I guess to reduce costs, they don't include it in the box. Pretty standard decals. I want to say that they feel like about maybe 0.5 millimeter thick. Decent thickness to the actual label sheet. But looking at it, I can already see that there's one aspect of it that makes it look a little bit low quality. I'm gonna try to zoom in to get this, like, so you can see it. I don't know if you can see, but the black decal with red color, like red highlight, you can actually see a little bit of white leaking in. It looks like if somebody like manually filled in like the black decal with white highlight, like if someone took a red marker and then just manually tried to fill in the white, that's kind of what the red looks like on this. And it looks like that's the case with all the black labels with red highlight. There's like white leaking through it. So if you plan on using the black decals with red highlights, I would recommend maybe buying some other decals, or just maybe being okay with the way that they look like this, or just using the red decals with the white highlight. Those don't seem to have the same issue. So I don't think it's a red ink issue, because the purely red decals don't seem to have the same leaking of white in them. And it looks like all the decals that are black with red highlight have that same issue. There's like slight white leaking into the decal itself. But overall, my impression of the decals are, they're good. I mean, it's a cheap button box, so the fact that it includes decals at all, I would say is a pretty good deal. I won't say that they're high quality. They just exist. They're decals. So if you want to use them, use them. I'm probably going to use them just because they're included. Set those aside. We've got styrofoam. Okay, bubble wrap. What's inside of the bubble wrap? Okay. Countersunk M5 Allen key screws, looks like. Maybe M4? I think they're M5. Yeah, I believe they're M5. They look to be about either 45 or 50 millimeters long. So I'm going to guess that the button box is about 30 to 35 millimeters thick, because the rim is about 4 millimeters thick. So that would give you about 35 millimeters from the rim to the back of the button box, leaving you about 1.5 centimeters of length in order to attach a quick release, which is a pretty good amount of length. So I'm going to guess that, yeah, this is about 45 or 50. Oh, there's an Allen key. Only one Allen key, probably about size 1, probably, yeah, it's probably a size 1 Allen key, maybe 1.5. We'll take a look at what that, I feel like this Allen key is probably not for the entire button box itself. We already know that these screws are M5, so it doesn't include an Allen key for the actual screws to the quick release. So the fact that it only includes one Allen key means that this is probably for the battery cover, because, yeah, I mean, the shifters could be moved, but everybody's going to have to remove the battery cover at some point, and only some people who buy this button box are going to want to adjust the shifters. So this is definitely for the, I'm guessing it's for the battery cover, but I could be wrong. Let's take a look at the button box itself. Styrofoam, styrofoam, and styrofoam. Alright, so it's inside of a Ziploc bag. Well, that's interesting. The Ziploc bag is open. This might not be, I hope that they didn't send it to me open, because when you put an electronic component inside of a Ziploc bag, the primary reason you do that is to protect it from water or like condensation. But if you have the Ziploc bag open, it defeats the purpose. Now, this might not have been Tomo at Sim Racing Bay or any of his employees that might have done this. This might have been done by customs. Electronics that come into Japan typically get opened up to get inspected by customs. So I want to say that this is probably customs that did it. I'll reserve judgment. Wow, it feels pretty weighty. This is my first Simucube 2 retail button box that I've held in my hands, but it looks very similar to the Asher Racing B16L. Yeah, other videos they didn't do this, so let's do this together. Let's try these buttons out. Can you hear that? So they're tactile, but the snap action doesn't feel like, if you press them in, there's a little bit of play. Can you see this? Now, what that play typically means is that the actual button itself is a plastic enclosure that's attached to the the hole for the button itself, and the button itself is just a momentary switch that's placed below the actual plastic actuator. So that play means that there's like a lever arm that's attached to this button cap, and that lever arm, there's a little bit of distance between it and the actual momentary switch, and once you finish that distance, you're actually on the switch itself, and then you can press it in. So yeah, not terribly high quality button, I imagine. I'm gonna open it up to take a look, but yeah, that level of play is on every button. You can see it. So yeah, all right, let's try out the encoders. People online were saying that the encoders feel kind of light. Well, you know, in my opinion, that they're not bad. They feel pretty good. We're gonna take this off to take a look at what the encoder itself looks like. And then we got the funky switch. Now if you look at the aluminum plate, you can see that the funky switch has kind of a countersunk hole. Let's see if I can focus there. So there's a countersunk hole underneath the funky switch, and the funky switch itself is flush up to the bottom of that countersunk hole. So what I'm assuming is, and I could be wrong, but I'm assuming underneath this front plate there is a PCB. Tomo probably designed his own PCB and soldered the funky switch directly to that PCB. These 7-way funky switches are pretty tricky to install onto a button box because unlike the encoders themselves, they don't actually have a threaded head, so you can't actually use, like, for example, like a 1 centimeter wide nut to actually hold them in place. There's no actual holes or threaded holes to hold it in place, so you have to wire it to a PCB. So because the top of the funky switch itself is flush with the bottom of the countersunk hole, I'm gonna guess there's a PCB under here, but we'll know when we take a look. And then these encoders have buttons. Now this is a physical finish issue, but I don't know if you can see it, but there's circular grooves. Kind of, they look like waves on the surface of the shifter plate. Can you see right here along this vertical line? I don't know if they're coming out in the camera, but that's actually, it's because of milling. So if you have a CNC mill, if you have a mill converted to a CNC router, then what it is it's like a drill that has sort of a buffering drill bit attached to it, like a drill press bit, and it pushes down and then cuts this out. So this is probably a maybe 50 millimeter thick block of aluminum, maybe 60-61 aluminum, and inside of the CNC machine it milled down like it did a depth drill, and then it ran up and down vertically in order to create this shifter housing. And you can see the finish there. There's like waves along where the CNC was done. So I mean, this is a sign of yeah, like it's not a very high quality finish, but because it was done with CNC, at least it's very stable. It's about 5 millimeters thick, so there's no stability issues here. But if you're sort of obsessive compulsive about like surface finishing, then yeah, the shifter surface might bother you a little bit. Let's try out the shifters. That's loud. It's loud but very tactile. So someone said that it's about 1 millimeter of travel distance. I don't think so. That looks like about 2 millimeters. But let's see. I'm gonna try to get some distance from the aluminum so we can hear the actual switch. Can you hear that? Like, I'm not letting it tap the aluminum. I'm just here, like that's just the switch. So that's what's called a snap action switch, and it's just by the actual audio of it. That's a high quality switch. That's not a cheap switch. I can tell by the sound. All right. The funky switches have their own encoder and push button, up, down, left, right. The funky switches feel pretty good. These are high quality funky switches. I believe they're Alps RTXF. They feel good. And the encoder has these rubber O-rings, which are the same as the rubber O-rings on the encoder knob. All right. Battery cover on the back with an antenna. And like most shifters, there's a little bit of vertical play, but it's not noticeable at all. It's very, very slight. Yeah, that's the button box. So now let's try to open this guy up. First, I want to see what that Allen key was for, so let's get that guy out, because you're going to want to know. I mean, I'm sure everybody who buys this is going to have their own set of Allen keys, but let's find out what this is for. I'm assuming it's for the battery cover. Oh no, that's way too big. Yeah, so it's not for the battery cover. Shifters? Nope. Not for the shifters. To remove the front plate? No. Don't tell me it's for the encoder knobs. Is it for the encoder knobs? Oh yeah, it's for the encoder knobs. I have mixed opinions about the Allen key being used for the encoder knobs. I mean, I guess it makes sense if you want to install the decals, because the decals, the center cutout for the decals on the encoders is definitely smaller than the encoder knobs itself. So if you want to apply those decals, you're going to have to put them on with the knob removed. But in my opinion, if you're going to include an Allen key with this button box, and you're only going to include one because you're going to assume that the user is going to use their own Allen key for other purposes, I would say that the Allen key that should be included in the box, in my opinion, is the one that's used for the battery cover. Because everybody's going to need to open this at some point to replace the battery. Like that's guaranteed. And I'm guessing that this this hex screw is the same size as the shifter hex screw. Let's find out. It looks like about a 1.5. Alright, so the shifter one is 1.5. That is it 2? It's a little loose. But it's definitely the same size. Let's try 2. Nope, it's 1.5. The Allen key for the battery cover and the shifters, and I'm guessing maybe the front panel? Yeah. Okay, so all of these hex pattern screws, the ones for the front panel, the ones for the shifters, the ones for the shifter paddles, and the ones for the battery cover, they are all the same size. And at least the battery cover and the shifter adjustment ones, almost everybody who buys this button box is definitely going to want to adjust those. So why not include the 1.5 in the box? It, in my opinion, it should have been in there, but you know, it's a minor issue. It's not a big deal. But okay, so the hex that's included, the Allen key that's included, is for removing the encoder knobs. So now let's open it up, guys. Let's take a look at the inside. Now, I'm just going to make a guess, but I'm guessing that there is a custom PCB inside with 2-wire snap connectors for the buttons and the shifters, because these shifters can be replaced with Asher Racing shifters. So I'm guessing that's what's underneath the cover here. And just for your own reference, if you do want to remove the button plate, the front panel, if you want to adjust the shifters, or if you want to replace the battery, you're going to want a 1.5 sized Allen key. Any sort of Allen key set will include 1.5, as long as you get something with a metric system. But if you're not getting an Allen key set, just buy a 1.5 and you'll be good to go. Alright, let's open this guy up. Now, the original BB Pro 32, you actually had to remove the back cover in order to replace the battery. This one includes a battery hood, but you still might want to open it up in case you want to replace the shifters with Asher Racing shifters. And the main reason why you would want to use a PCB when you're building something like this instead of using soldered wires is because these funky switches, these 7-way funky switches, they don't actually have like a hole for mounting to like a plate. They only have the pins for actually slotting through a PCB. So if you were to try to install a funky switch using standard soldered wire, like maybe a 24 gauge wire, silicone wire, and just solder it, you're going to have to figure out a way to mount it, and that's going to be a pain in the butt without a PCB. So we've got all 4 screws out. Let's see if we can get this guy off. All right. Really carefully. Oh yeah, okay, so it's a PCB. Oh, funny enough, we can, all right, so red is on the, to the side of the Y on Sim Racing Bay. So let's remove the shifter so that we can take the whole thing apart. Right. Go. So here's the rear enclosure, and yeah, okay, so these slotted M5 like standoffs, they're pretty thick. So I want to say this thing will be pretty stable. You don't have to worry about this thing sort of breaking or something. One thing, I'm nervous about slots, vertical slots, because if you don't have enough torque on the M5 bolts to your quick release, and let's say you apply some vertical pressure to the button box itself, it could slide down. Now, of course, that's not going to make your wheel like cause any deformation, and it's not going to break your quick release. But what might end up happening is that this aluminum, this brushed aluminum, might actually scrape against your wheel. And if you're using an expensive wheel like an OMP Super Quadro or a Sparco P310, then you're not going to want, you know, that sort of damage to happen. So I would be careful about these inserts, and personally I would either install them all the way at the top of the insert or all the way at the bottom of the insert, just to prevent that from happening. And I would make sure you torque down really tight. But overall, the enclosure is pretty standard stuff. It's about, I want to say 4 millimeters or 5 millimeters thick aluminum at the bottom, but the walls are maybe less, maybe 3 millimeters thick. But I mean, with 6061 aluminum, you're not really going to have an issue with the walls being slightly thin. Yeah, pretty nice. It looks like there's one more mounting pattern for the shifter on the inside. So if you wanted to use this, you'd have to open it up anyway. But you know, of course, you're going to need your own hex key for that. Oops. And here's the PCB, and I was right. It is using a PCB. Now, one thing about this PCB, the Sim Racing Bay button box wireless module is on the front side here, and it looks like the cable for the antenna is held in place using a zip tie. I'm not sure why there's these 4 holes here. Maybe there was another purpose for those in another button box, but they're there. So technically, so I've actually used the wireless button module for the Simucube 2 before, and these 2 holes here on the actual PCB itself, they're for grounding. So I'm guessing Tomo had planned on grounding the button box, the button module itself here, and if you had a grounding wire here attached to the ground on the button module PCB itself, and then you fixed that ground wire to any of these standoffs, then that would technically ground the button module itself. But a lot of people believe that the grounding is not necessary. So I think maybe it's not, that's the reason why it's not actually used here, because it's not really important. This looks to be manually soldered. You can tell because there's actually soldering like scratch points here, which means that somebody was holding a soldering iron. These 7-way funky switches are a pain in the butt to solder by hand. A lot of the contacts are very close to each other, so getting them perfectly soldered is very difficult by hand, and that's, you can tell that whoever soldered these had a, you know, a fun time soldering them, and it includes 2 of them. So whoever put this thing together, you know, they definitely earned their money. But let's see if we could see anything else. Okay, so there's 2 more connections for buttons here. I want to say that these are probably so that if you have a rim that has buttons on the rim itself, then you can sort of route a cable inside. How would you even do that? Maybe through the shifter holes? Yeah, I'm guessing through the shifter holes. But if you use these same wire connectors, you can probably connect 2 buttons here. I'm not sure which buttons they replace. I'll take a look later. Actually, you know what? I'll take a look right now. Just give me a second. Okay, so I took a look at the manual, and it looks like if you run a wire through here and connect it to the outside these two pin connectors here, you'll actually share the momentary push action with the rotary encoders. So this push action for the encoders will be duplicated by whatever buttons you attach here. So yeah, I mean, it duplicates an input, but at least it allows you to use buttons that are on your steering wheel itself. That's about it. I think overall this is a really high quality PCB. There's some sort of like relics of probably changed decisions when Tomo was designing it. Like these holes here, I'm not sure what they're for. And the inclusion of the grounding holes, even though they're not used, it's kind of interesting. But overall, this is a really high quality PCB. It's a very efficient use of space, and it's clearly tagged. I don't know why. That makes sense. So I'll take a look at the video to make sure, but the reason why this black marker is tagged out is probably because they made a mistake in labeling. If you notice here, this is paddle 2 for the paddle 2, the shifter, and you'll notice here that it says pad 1 underneath the black marker. So what I'm guessing is that pad 1 is actually here on the inside, and this outside part is EXT1. And they made a mistake when they labeled the PCB, which is the reason why they covered it with black marker, just to make sure that they didn't make a mistake and connect them backwards. Because if that happened, then you wouldn't have paddle 1. So if you connected them, of course the button box would still work. If you had paddle 1 connected to this contact point, which is for the buttons, it would still work. Like, it's not going to cause an issue where it's not going to work. The problem is that if you did this, if you connected this and you didn't connect the shifter here, and you didn't have a rim that had buttons on it, then you'll end up having to press. You'll end up not being able to set the button plate to discovery mode, because in order to set this to discovery mode for your Simucube, you have to hold the left shifter and the right shifter at the same time. So yeah, all right, let's get this thing back together and I'll give you guys my final thoughts. And one last thing I wanted to talk about is to confirm that, yeah, these buttons have, you can see that plastic spacer before they actually touch the actuation switch. So I'm not sure what these actual buttons are. I tried to find the actual model, but I couldn't see them. But yeah, I mean, they're not terribly high quality, but they're not bad quality either. They're not like AliExpress buttons or something like that. So, you know, overall, I'm very impressed with the build quality, especially the PCB. It's very nice. A few mistakes on the labeling of the PCB, but you know, we've all been there. Alright guys, I thought I would just do one last section where I talk about my concluding thoughts, and I show the button box actually mounted with some of the decals placed. This might be similar to how you guys might actually mount it. I have a D-shaped Super Quadro clone. This is leather wrapped because I don't want to use gloves. And I applied the decals. So the encoder decals require you to remove the knobs. Same for the funky switch decal. And I suspected that once the decals were mounted that you might not notice the quality of the red on black. I was wrong. Mounted, you can still very much see that there's like a slight white leaking through the red, but at this price point I don't consider it to be that big of a deal. It's kind of like you're buying an entry level, like sort of a one of the more affordable button boxes that's available. But this is how it looks. It's mounted all the way at the bottom of the slots, so this is as high as it can get on the D-shaped wheel. There's about 1 millimeter of clearance at the top of the button box to the top of the rim itself. But if you were holding it in your hands, this is how it might feel. There's approximately, let's see, that looks like about 2 inches, so about 50 millimeters of distance. Plenty of distance to get back and hit those shifters. And overall it's very stable mounted, and the buttons line up to a point where you can hit these 2 buttons with your thumb pretty confidently. You're going to have to move your hand away from the wheel in order to hit the rotary encoders or to tap the bottom buttons. The funky switch placement is a little bit interesting to me. Like, Ergonomically, I feel like they're a little difficult to get to, but yeah, I mean, overall they're still usable. I think anywhere you place the funky switches, it's going to require you to remove your hands in order to get to them. But yeah, this is how it looks mounted. It might look, you might have some similar sort of button layout or decal pattern if you wanted, if you were to actually buy it. So in conclusion, how do I feel about the SRB BB Ultra? I didn't actually buy the BB Pro 32, but this is overall, I think it's an improvement just from what the BB Pro 32 included. These D-shaped Super Quadro clones are pretty cheap to get a hold of. You could find them on Amazon. I found this one for 50 bucks on a local marketplace. So I feel like even though it doesn't include the rim, it has 2 funky switches, so this takes full advantage of all 28 inputs of the Simucube wireless button module. So in my opinion, it's a much better value in terms of inputs. I think that the enclosure itself is high quality. The electronics inside are high quality. I'm a really big fan of the PCB. Tomo put a lot of thought into the way that the PCB was built and laid out. The soldering is really nice. These shifters are a really amazing value. These are easily worth about 100 euros by themselves. And I feel that the encoders themselves and the funky switches are pretty nice. And the buttons do offer some tactility. They have some sort of tactile feedback. So they're not cheap Amazon buttons. They're not like these low quality, I don't know, like 10 buttons for $5 kind of like AliExpress style buttons. They're definitely like a decent quality button. So overall, I'm very proud. I'm very happy with this purchase. It's a very good value, especially if you're looking for a button box and you're not sure how you feel about the Simucube wireless solution and you're looking for something just to get started. I think this is a very great starter wheel, starter button box to use for a beginner wheel. Now that being said, there are a couple of things that I think I wish would have been done differently. So the first is that I think that the decals themselves, they're very basic, but I would have liked to see some of the more popular functions that people use, like pit or left and right to be used for look left or look right, a pass button, ignition, start. It didn't include any of those buttons. So actually up here in the top left and right, I used look left and look right, but the decals didn't include left or right arrows, so I'm just leaving them without decals. And on the bottom right, I have exit, but normally I have start and ignition, and those also weren't included. So the decals are a very basic set, but you might want to pick up an actual decal set if you use something that's more of the popular mapping. That said, everything else kind of included the stuff that I use. I use the left button for radio, for push to talk, and I use the right button for exit car. So yeah, like the decals themselves, I think that the black decal with the red highlight could have been printed better, or at least just not even included at all. Because if this is the quality that they're going to be included in, then I feel like it's kind of meh, you know, like maybe I won't use them. The second thing that I think that I wish might have been done a little bit differently is that the Allen key that's included, I think it should have been the same size as the battery cover, because the Allen key that's included is only usable for actually removing the encoder knobs. So that was a pretty interesting choice. Like either include all the Allen keys that you would use for the button box, or don't include any at all, and just have it in the guide which sizes you need. And the last thing, and it's kind of a minor issue, but I do wish that these funky switches were located down here, next to the rotary encoders. I know that it's kind of redundant to have a funky switch right next to an encoder, considering a funky switch has increase and decrease rotations, but in my opinion, it would have made them a lot more serviceable, like if they're down here on the bottom corners, because you can reach them with your thumb. Funky switches, you could use them with your thumb pretty confidently, like at least the up, down, left, right functions, and if you just move your index finger over, you can rotate to increment or decrement. But up here it requires you to actually shift your hand, and of course you're probably going to use them during a pit stop, but if they were down here you could probably access them without taking your hand off the wheel. So I do think that the funky switches are nice, but maybe only one would have been necessary. In my opinion, having an extra 2 rotary encoders and 1 funky switch would have been probably a better use of the 28 inputs. but I understand that this is probably mimicking the Asher Racing Formula 28. So maybe that's the reason why they decided on 2 funky switches. But yeah, overall, those are 2 very minor issues. They're not even anything that I think ruins the value of the wheel. I think that leaving the funky switches as is and simply including 1 more Allen key and maybe touching up on the decals to include a few more functions, and this thing would probably be perfect for the price that you pay. Those 2 minor issues don't take away from the fact that it's probably the best value under 500 euros for a Simucube 2 wireless wheel. But yeah, those are just 2 recommendations that I would make. When I opened it up, I did notice, like I showed in the video, that there's a few areas where the PCB, it seems like maybe they made a mistake or they made some decisions when they were designing the PCB that ended up getting thrown out when the actual button box was being completed. I do think that eventually, just to make it less confusing, they should probably correct the paddle and external button like labeling on the PCB and maybe remove those holes if they're not going to be used, especially the one for the ground. Other than that though, the PCB is very high quality, so I think it's very nice. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. A little bit more of a technical insight on the button box itself. I'll take it for a drive after I move. I'm going to be moving in 2 weeks, and then that's when I'll start making videos again. I did buy a Simucube 2, but I paid for that with my own money. I know people are like, man, you keep upgrading for a casual racer, but the fact that I'm a casual racer has more to do with the time that I can spend racing, not necessarily the amount of money. But I am going to do a video where I talk about the Simucube 2, whether I think it's worth it or not for the amount of money that you spend. Too long didn't read, it's not, it's very expensive, but yeah, like I'll talk about that later. Thanks guys for watching.